And so the flip side of being inconsequential and tiny is that each of us is in every moment a full expression of the entire universe. Um, and nothing, pure just as it is. And so from that perspective, impermanence and the balancing job between us is what it is to be human. Um, because you can't live, if you live in one world, well, you get this. But if you live in the other world, as I said, my mother couldn't, feed or clean herself. But how do we use that shift? So the more that idea gets out there, potentially, when I wrote the book, I actually landed on the stuff I just said at the very end because Mark and I were out with some friends drinking a little, and a 26-year-old friend of ours who got a little disinhibited let loose with this anger about how our generation screwed up the world for him. And I thought, if my book doesn't have something to say about that, then why even bother? Um, the Have I told you? I think I told you about when we spoke, Daniel, about my grandmother in Riga.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, should I tell that story?
Absolutely, go for it.
So, um, so my father was born in Germany. We're Jewish. That was not a good combination in the 20s and 30s. My father was sent to England on something called the Kindertransport. The British rescued 10,000. They paid the German government for 10,000 Jewish children who were sent to England and rescued that way. His parents were both sent to Riga, as most German Jews were, where they were killed either in the forests or in work camps. Uh, and a few years ago, I went to Riga and discovered that when I was there, between the museum, the ghetto itself was just a working class neighborhood that still exists. I could find the house where my grandmother and all her cousins were crowded in before they were killed. Um, and stuff online, I could actually find out everything that happened to my grandparents and my uncle who survived all that. And my uncle, they had thought about sending him to Amsterdam. He was too old for the Kindertransport, but my grandmother couldn't send her other son away, so she kept him. And he told us later that if she had sent him to Amsterdam, he would have been sent to Auschwitz or Treblinka and he would have been killed. But going to Riga, he was in a work camp, so he had the chance to survive. And he did. He wound up in Poland and has, I think there are 14 great grandchildren now. So when I found the actual spot, the mass grave where my grandmother was shot, I thought, who was she in that last moment? And in a flash, I sort of, the thought came to me, oh, I think I've met my grandmother. Um, in her last moment, I think her thought was, we made all the wrong decisions. And I've lost my boys, I've lost my husband, and now I'm going to be killed. And that's what she died with. And what she couldn't know is that she was, out of all her siblings and cousins, she was the only one who didn't lose a child. So she actually made the right decisions, but she didn't know that. I have a shamanic teacher, as one does. This sort of just, he wandered into my life 13 years ago. And he's adept at traveling the astral plane and, stuff like that. My grandmother's name was Elise, but everyone called her Lysian. And so he shows up the day I'm now going to Germany for a family reunion, invited by the town where my family comes from. It was the 80th anniversary of Kristallnacht, and they invited us all to come back. So I was on the way there, and he comes online because he's military. I usually only get to talk to him online. And he was worried about me being in a place as dark as Riga was for me. And he said, you know, you're not alone. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, there's a woman with you. Who is it? I don't know. It's funny. I'm getting two different names. Lisa, Leeson? I said, that's my grandmother. He said, well, she's sort of close in on your right side. Long story short, I go to Germany and I ask him, is she still here with me? But I'm starting to develop a sense of her presence, although that could just be me telling myself a story. But at one point, I turn to the elder of our generation and I say to her, do you believe in ghosts? And she said, of course I do. I said, I think I brought my grandmother back from Riga. And she said, oh, I already knew that. So I wondered whether I was bringing her back to her hometown. Our family lived there for 5 generations. Maybe that's what I was doing. But she came back to New York with me. And I was having a vivid sense of her. And I checked in with my shaman. And he was like, yeah, she's still around. And then one day she wasn't. So I checked in with him. He said, no, she's not with you. Let me look around. And then he came back to me. He goes, oh, she's with your mother. So my mother didn't actually leave after all this. That's the afterword in her book. Your mother's taking her around to see the grandchildren and the great grandchildren. Um, and then I felt her come back, and I checked, and yes, she came back. And this was Kristallnacht was the end of November, so we're coming up on the anniversary of the 2-day train ride to Riga from Germany. And I reached out to all my cousins and told them what was going on. And I said, let's all light candles on those 2 days and put out pictures. Sorry. Put out pictures of all her descendants. And, send a note of, see, you did well, and gratitude. And that's when she went away. And she's been gone since.
Hmm.
So the lesson I take from her relates to the complexity stuff. You have to see what you can do. You have to try your best to make decisions based on what your experiences are. But you have to make those choices knowing that you can't know which are going to be the right ones. All you can do is respond to what you're encountering in the present moment with as much wisdom as you can muster and hope something happens. And even if you come up with something that helps, you may not be a witness to the help that it brings. You have to do it without expectation that you'll ever know. And I think to me, that's kind of where all of this science and mathematics and philosophy and practice comes down to, is just that. Um, and that's what we have to face the current moment with. And